This single-handedly allowed me to get an amazing grade, and I personally feel like this is the key to getting a grade 9 in religious studies. Hey guys, it's Shola, and today I'm going to be telling you how I got full marks and a grade 9 in GCSE RS and how you can too. Most people could get a grade 8 or grade 9 in religious studies with the right amount of effort, but it's just a question of, are you willing to put in the effort? Are you willing to put in the work to get a good grade? It's all dependent on you. And most people tend to say that RS is useless, and the majority of people who do RS are like forced to by their school, but I think that it's such a good opportunity to get an easy A star instead of just wasting it away and just not taking it seriously. So why not make the most of it and get a grade 9? In this video, I'm going to be giving you all the tips and tricks on how to get a grade 9 in religious studies. Be sure to grab a cup of tea and a notepad because this video is going to be very in-depth. So let's jump right into it. That is some good tea. So here are the timestamps for today's video. So I'm going to be going through how to make grade 9 mind maps, how to cram the entire textbook, how to answer each type of question type, and how to get 12 out of 12 on the essay question at the end of the paper. Let's get started. Mind maps. I feel like a lot of people think mind maps are just a waste of time. Like, you're basically just rewriting your notes in another form. And in most of my videos, I say that this isn't good, but I feel like for religious studies, it's just not effective to make flashcards on every single thing. I think it's better to just make a mind map which summarizes an entire topic. And I personally feel like this is the key to getting a grade 9 in religious studies. This single-handedly allowed me to get an amazing grade in almost every single one of my assessments and the final exam. This seems too good to be true, but here is how to make a grade 9 mind map. So the main thing is summarizing. So I would summarize an entire topic onto an A4 piece of paper. That sounds crazy with the amount of content that comes up, but I promise you it's possible. And if you can do this, then it'll be really effective in the long run. You basically want to condense it in a way that is understandable to you, whilst also being very small, so that it's easier to cram and it's easier to regurgitate later on. To do this, I really recommend that you use shorthand notation. Just reduce words into something that you'll actually understand. So for example, Genesis, you can just say Gen. You can also use arrows for this leads to. You can use before instead of actually writing the whole word before, and symbol instead of using and. It's just simple things like this which can cut down a lot of space. So in the mind map, you should put the main topic in the middle of the page, and then you should write the subtopics, which are like the different pages coming off the main topic, and then summarize each subtopic into bullet points. I really recommend to use a color code. Use a different color for quotes, names, and events, and this just makes it stand out in particular so it stays in your brain for longer. And I would say please try to stay on the front page of the A4. Try not to go to the second page, especially if it's the first few topics in the textbook. It shouldn't be taking up a lot of space, but if you have to, then you should use the back of the page, but only use up to halfway. The whole point of this is to summarize and condense. If you're writing pages and pages, this method is not going to be effective because you're not going to be able to remember every single word on that page, which is what you want to eventually learn how to do. Cut out anything you don't need. This just makes the load lighter for your brain to handle and to memorize, and it just makes it easier because eventually you'll be able to visualize this mind map in the exam, and you'll be able to just quickly take information from that instead of having a big A3 mind map which has every single thing in the textbook. Like, you might as well just read the textbook. So please don't write too much on this mind map. So let's move on to how you can cram the entire textbook for religious study. This seems very impossible. When you see all of the content in those textbooks, it's like, how am I even going to memorize all of this? Is it even possible? Yes, it is possible, and this is how. So once the mind map is done, here is where the grade 9 method comes into action. You can't just write these mind maps and file them away and not look at them for the rest of the 2 years and expect to get a grade 9. It isn't going to happen. What you have to do is put these mind maps to good use and use them as mark schemes. So what I mean by this is that this mind map is basically a mark scheme for your blurting. And if you don't know what blurting is basically an active form of revision. You actively recall things on a piece of plain paper, and you basically fill in what you missed out in another color. So every revision session when you're revising RS, I really recommend to start these sessions off with a blurt. So blurt a specific topic and write down everything you can remember. And initially, this is going to hurt your self-esteem because you're going to remember close to nothing, as in that page is going to be almost completely empty apart from the title, a few subtopics, and maybe a quote if you're lucky. But eventually, if you keep doing this every single revision session, you will see a gradual progress in how much you can remember, and at the end you'll actually surprise yourself of how much you can actually regurgitate. And this is really important because this tests the same part of your brain that will be tested in the exam. You're not going to have your textbook with you in the exam, so it's better to start getting used to not having it and then writing a question, because that's essentially what you're going to have to do in your summer exams. This is much better than kidding yourself that you know all of the content and then your mind going blank in the exam. A lot of people think that you don't need to revise RS, especially if you're Christian or you're Muslim and you already have these quotes in your mind. But please don't fall into this trap, because there's such a small chance that you'll get an A star in it if you don't take it seriously. And that's not to say spend all of your time on RS, I'm not saying that, but if you just spend like 20 minutes a week blurting, I guarantee you'll get a better grade than if you didn't. And make sure you fill in everything you missed out in a red pen. This might seem really long and really tedious, but you writing this down reconsolidates this in your brain and helps you to remember it for next time. It reduces the chance of you forgetting it, and it's just good muscle memory. And then once you're finished the blurting, you should do a question on this topic that you just blurted. This just helps to reinforce the information you just blurted, and also helps you to practice exam questions. You can make up a question using the format that's in your past papers and then just change the subtopic to something that's in the topic that you just revised. Now let's move on to how to answer different question types, because that is really important in getting a grade 9. So different questions have different requirements for you to get a grade 9. If the question says give 2 things, give 2 ideas, and you're writing 5 paragraphs, you're going way overboard and you're not going to have time for the questions at the end. So here is how to answer each question type. I'm going to base this off the AQA papers because I personally did AQA, but even if you do OCR and Excel, etc., all of this should help you because it's essentially the same thing, just a slightly different way of asking questions. Let's get into it. Overall, the aim of RS is to speed through whilst answering fully the first 4 questions so that you can get to the 5th question in plenty of time to write an amazing essay. So let's go through the first 4 questions. So the first question is a multiple choice, and this is basically really easy, especially if you've been blurting and you've been trying to memorize everything. And honestly, this should take you less than 30 seconds. If it doesn't, then it means that you haven't revised as much, because this is honestly the easiest question you're gonna get on the paper. Moving on to question 2, which is often a give 2 ideas kind of question. When it says give 2, it literally means state 2. It doesn't mean go into explanation, start providing quotes. Give 2 simple ideas. But the problem where most people go wrong is writing the same idea in different ways. I promise you, you're not shocking the examiner. They will know and they will only give you 1 mark. So please revise beforehand, and then you'll have 2 distinctive ideas to write down. The third question is often an explain 2 ideas kind of question. This question can go really bad or really well. So if you spend more than 6-7 minutes on this question, then you are going overboard. The way that you have to structure this question is point, explain, nothing more, nothing less. State the idea and then explain the idea. So you can use a quote if you want to, but it's not required. Just make sure that you have at least 4 sentences, and this will just help you to maximize your chances of getting full marks on this question. So really focus on the command word. If it says give, then you give the 2 points. If it says explain, then you have to go further, just a little bit, but not too much. I really hope you guys don't start writing paragraphs and paragraphs, because this is only like the 3rd question. Moving on to the 4th question. This question is another kind of explain question, but it's 5 marks. So there's obviously something else that is requiring from you. That is some kind of scripture, some kind of quote, and this is why it's really important to learn your quotes. Through blurting, you can learn a lot of quotes, but there's also another method which I did on the side, which is flashcards. So as I said before, I don't recommend you make flashcards on every single point in RS because it's kind of a waste of time. I do recommend that you make flashcards for quotes. The way I used to do this was I basically wrote the chapter and the verse on the front, and then on the back I'll put the quote. You don't need to put the whole quote, just put whatever will be relevant for you to write in the question. And you basically just flip through these until you can regurgitate what the quote is, and this will help you to quickly remember quotes in the exam. And a way that you can make this less tedious and more fun is to do it with friends. So I really recommend that you put all of them on the chapter side with the quotes hidden, and then make it a game where you get to pick which flashcard you want to flip over. If you get it right, you get to keep the flashcard. If you get it wrong, you have to leave it and someone else can answer it, and then the person who wins is the person who gets the most flashcards at the end. This is just a way to make revision less boring. Obviously, when you're revising by yourself all the time, it gets really boring, you feel demotivated, but when it's like a competitive thing with your friends, it's easier to get through. I really recommend doing that to mix up your revision sessions. Going back to question 4, if you really do have to, then use one of those generic quotes. You might not get the mark, but at least it's better than leaving it blank. For example, there's one quote that every single person uses in the Christianity exam, which is love your neighbor as yourself. This is just helpful as a last resort. It might not relate to every single question type, but it sure can be related to a lot of them. So let's move on to the most important part of this video, which is how to get 12 out of 12 in your essay questions. So during GCSEs, I almost always got 12 out of 12 on these questions. It wasn't because I'm gifted or I'm naturally smart. It was literally because I kept practicing it and I kept using this grade 9 structure, which I'm about to tell you now. This is the most important part, so get your pen and paper and let's get into it. So in the introduction, you want to state what side you're on. You either agree or you disagree. Don't be in the middle. This side doesn't necessarily need to be something that you agree on. It's just something that you have to write more convincingly for. Once you finish the introduction, which should be really quick, nothing too hefty, you can move on to paragraph 1. Paragraph 1 is basically you talk about the side that you're on, give a point which proves that side, and try to use a quote, try to mention keywords, and afterwards you come to argue this in the same paragraph. So you can be like, some people may see this argument as flawed because, and then you write the point, maybe include a quote if you have one, and then you counteract this back and you say, however, this argument is inconsistent because, you write your point. Wherever you have a quote that's relevant, include it, because it really impresses the examiner when you know your stuff. And then you move on to paragraph 2, which is the side that you're against. Basically just explain why some people think this point is true, why this is like a really good argument, and then you should counteract that and say why you think that argument is irrelevant, why it doesn't work, and then counteract it again. But then you can say something like, however, some people think that this is a good argument because blah blah blah. But try not to make it too convincing. You want to make your side the most convincing. Finally, when you get to the conclusion, you want to repeat your side and say why it's true, and say all of the evidence that you've been talking about throughout the question and why this makes your side the most valid. And that's pretty much your conclusion done. Honestly, this whole question is just a case of arguing back and forth. So if you're good at arguing, I guess you'll probably ace this. This question is basically just a test of how convincingly you can argue against yourself and how you can prove that your side is the best. And it's basically just about evaluating the question and making sure that you're relevant to the question. Don't try to stray away from the question and just write about something that you're better at, something that you know more of. Honestly, stick to the question. Say, some people may think, and then include the question in your answer. Don't ever stray away from the question, because you're not going to get any marks from this and you're wasting precious time. When you do these kind of questions, these are questions that you can't really mark by yourself. So I really do recommend that you give them to your teacher, ask them for critical feedback. Don't tell them to be easy on you, because it's better to be harsh now than to be opening on your results and seeing some bad grade because you were too scared to ask for advice. So make sure to go to your teacher for advice. And also, the more you blurt, the better your questions will come up, because you know more content and you can actually embed it into your questions. And also be sure to use specialist vocab throughout your question. It just proves to the examiner that you know what you're talking about, and obviously that will impress them. So guys, that is the end of the video. I really hope you found it useful and that you can get something from it. And if you've reached this far and you haven't liked the video, go and like it right now, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.